Hello, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, could the legalization of polygamy in the United States empower those in polygamous families? We discuss whether polygamy has a place in the battle for marriage equality. Our digital producer Malika Bilal is here looking out for your live feedback. So Malika, yesterday we mentioned we were looking at polygamy as a subject. What happened in our community?
Well, it sparked something, definitely. We got 1,000 Facebook likes
Whoa.
and hundreds of comments on the post about this. And so we decided to ask that central question you just asked. Does polygamy have a place in the battle for marriage equality? We got both sides. Mountain Poppies on Facebook says it might if it didn't have an entire culture that raises children to conform to it, associated with it. And then on the other side, Kaz says, how does that differ from an entire culture that raises children to conform with monogamy? And of course, we want to hear from all of you at home. So join our discussion with your comments and your questions using the hashtag AJStream.
And joining us in the studio is Gillian Keenan. Gillian is a writer. She's a freelance writer whose recent piece titled Legalize Polygamy! Helped prompt this very conversation. You can check it out on slate.com. Gillian, welcome to the stream.
Thank you for having me.
We look forward to hearing from you in just a little bit. Meanwhile, have you missed any recent episodes of the stream, or would you like to watch them over and over again? Subscribe to our podcast. All you have to do is go to stream.aljazeera.com/podcast, which is where I am right now, and you can get your podcast in HD, in SD, in audio, which is where I would always keep up with the stream before I was in the stream. stream.aljazeera.com/podcast.
Hi, I'm Julian Savulescu. I'm a professor of practical ethics. I'd rather be surfing than at work, and I'm in the stream.
Should polygamy be legalized in the US? Much of the marriage equality debate here has focused on same-sex marriage, but some are arguing that polygamy should also be included. The practice has been illegal in the West for decades, and this has pushed it underground, where many polygamous families operate in secret or live in isolated communities. And those who oppose polygamy say that women and children often become victims in marriages like these. They argue that young girls get forced into early marriages with older men, and children suffer from being part of such big families. But would these problems resolve themselves if polygamy was legal? A number of writers suggest that not only is this a matter of personal choice, but legalizing polygamy would protect and empower families who currently live in secret. So how valid is that argument? To help us discuss this, we're also joined via Skype by Tyler Meason. Tyler is a filmmaker and co-director of the documentary Sons of Perdition. It's a behind-the-scenes look into the lives of teenagers who've been exiled from their polygamous families and community. And in our Google Plus Hangout are Kristen Decker. She's the director of Sound Choices Coalition. That's an organization aiming to end polygamy. And she's also the author of 50 Years in Polygamy, where she shares her previous experience as a polygamous wife, mother, leader, and teacher. Joe and Valerie Duggar, they're in a polygamous marriage and have written a book called Love x3, and that's the first ever memoir of a polygamous family. And finally on the phone we have Khadija. She's a co-wife in a polygamous family, and Khadija is not her actual name, but she asked us to protect her identity. So welcome to you all. Let's start with Gillian. You got this conversation started with that piece that you wrote about legalizing polygamy in the United States. Okay, you're laughing. State your case.
You know, I like to think that my job is to start conversations, not end them. So while I have questions and I have my own perspective, of course, I think that all of these perspectives are really valuable, and I'm glad that we're talking about this, because I think the example of plural marriage raises a lot of really important questions about the way our government interacts with our sexual and romantic lives, and the role that religion plays in the state in this country. Right from the beginning, I think it's important to be very clear that calling for the legalization or decriminalization of polygamy is not the same thing as condoning abuse. People who abuse women and children are criminals, and those crimes should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. But I do think that crime, when forced into isolation, can kind of flourish unchecked. And I do think there are responsible, consensual, adult polygamous families out there. And in a country like the United States that specifically espouses the value of freedom of religious expression, I think we need to ask ourselves whether this is an adult choice that should be protected, particularly when it is chosen for religious reasons.
So Gillian, are you married yet?
I'm not, I'm engaged.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
How many husbands are you intending to have?
Just one.
Okay.
But I have to say, there was never really a point when I was a little girl when I sat down and chose monogamy. That's just the environment that I was raised in, so it seemed very natural to me. So I like the person on Twitter who pointed out that there is, in polygamous communities, there's absolutely a culture where children grow up expecting to become polygamists. They don't necessarily choose it. But at the same time, I think in the monogamous community, we kind of grow up expecting to be monogamous. I certainly did.
Joe and Valerie, you're in a polygamous relationship, a polygamous marriage. So we've got one of the Mrs. Duggars there. How many other Mrs. Duggars are there, Valerie?
There are two others.
Okay. So in terms of your lifestyle, how do you live? Because polygamy in the US is illegal. So give us a little insight into how you manage to live your life and be criminals at the same time.
Well, it's very much a part of our culture. Just as she just said, that it was natural choice to grow up and live this way. However, many of our siblings, all of our siblings, have not chosen to live this way, and never intend to. So it is, even while it's still a choice, it's not the extreme expectation.
Malika.
Well, we're getting a lot of questions, for people in polygamous relationships. And so I'd like to pose this one to Khadija, who's on the phone with us in Bahrain. Khadija, Muhammad on Twitter says, how is it possible to show love of equal magnitude to all spouse without falling or yielding into the temptation of preference?
I think you probably would have to ask my husband that question, because that's that's what he has to do. I mean, I have one husband; he has two wives. I feel that my husband loves each of us the same as he would if we were in a monogamous marriage. I'm the first wife, and the second wife has been obviously had a long time of being the only wife. I don't feel any less loved now than I did as a monogamous wife. So,
but Khadija, you've been married for 13 years, correct? Can you tell us your experience and how you got into that?
Well, that's quite a long story. Okay, I'm a convert to Islam, but I was actually into the idea of non-monogamy even before I became a Muslim, because I studied anthropology, and that kind of opened my eyes to the fact I've been raised in a monogamous culture, and this kind of opened up my eyes to the fact that there are other stable ways that society could run, and for example, one man can love more than one woman. And when I became Muslim, I didn't have a problem with Islamic polygamy, and with my husband, I always told him that I was okay if he got another wife, provided he did it all the correct Islamic way, provided she was a nice person, provided he was open and honest about it. I didn't want anything secret behind my back, and
So Khadija, when your husband told you, darling, I'm going to marry another wife, how did he actually? How did that conversation come up?
Before he married her. I actually flew to the country where she lived, which was on another continent to where I was living, to meet her and her family. I could see she's a nice person that I could be friends with, and that's it really.
Let me just bring in Kristen, because you've seen both sides of this situation. You have been in a polygamous family, and now you're actually campaigning to actually stop other women from being in that kind of situation. How did you get to that realization?
I would actually like to start by saying that I am pro-choice. I believe that people should be able to choose their relationships and partnerships if they're adults and have had experiences and education on both sides and know what they're doing. But I was born and raised into polygamy. My father was the leader of the polygamous sect I was in for the AUB for 28 years. All around me, in my childhood was sad, and I saw that all around me. I saw the heartaches of women like me who stayed because it was a religious indoctrination. Like you said, that we were brought up with that. We were told we have to live that way, and if you don't live that way, then you do not make it to the celestial kingdom. You will not have your children with you, and you won't have your family. So therefore, it was coercion. And all those years, I thought I had a choice. I smiled through it all. I did the best I could. I loved my sister wife. I loved my husband. He loved her, and we did the very best we could. As time went on and I saw more and more abuse and more heartaches, which is more dominant, more out there than I even can ever let you know. That's what I see and hear every day and have all of my life. I don't think people understand that the heartaches to legalize it without, and in fact, I'd even say that you could decriminalize or legalize, but there needs to be parameters with that, because right now it hasn't been in check for 60 years, and it's gotten out of hand. And the isolation is another thing that they did bring up. I was even a part of that as a childhood. But when we think about isolation really happening, it was because people were moving away from you wicked people on the outside. There were many, many communities and schools that were established and still are to keep children away from what they are considered the truth and education,
right,
and those kinds of things.
Okay.
Well, Tyler, I want to bring you in here as the co-director of Sons of Perdition, in which you followed 3 exiled Mormon boys. I want to get your thoughts on 2 tweets. Actually, the first one's a Facebook comment from Carl. He says, as long as all parties are consenting adults who know what they're getting themselves into, why is it anyone else's business? How does it hurt me? It doesn't. But on the other hand, you're getting pushback from Veronica, who says polygamy in every instance has proven to be oppressive to both women and children. Polygamy is wrong for a reason. Tell us your thoughts.
You know, I can see both sides of that because, you know, look, I'm a supporter of gay marriage, and it's hard for me to find that side okay and yet condone or oppose polygamy. However, what I have seen, by and large, after 6 years of intensive research into the polygamous lifestyle, I have seen, by and large, nothing but pain and suffering and hurt and abuse on a rampant level. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, educational abuse. And polygamy is the canary in the coal mine. It is one of those elements that creates these problems. Now, I don't necessarily know if legalizing it will eliminate these. By and large, I hasten to say that it is, for the most part, legal. You know, it's so difficult to crack down on it. It is so difficult to prosecute it. Look, there's people right on your show right now who live in Utah and are on television claiming that they're polygamists, which is illegal. Has anyone prosecuted them? Nobody is. Yet these problems persist. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of boys exiled every year from these communities. Pain, suffering, heartache, and heartbreak occur because of polygamy or the religion behind it. And that is what the problem is. It's not necessarily polygamy, it's the rampant abuse that occurs within the confines of polygamy. So gay marriage, I don't necessarily see the effects, the ill effects of that, like I do polygamy, which is by and large a continual plague upon the Western United States, bigger than most people can imagine.
Joe and Valerie.
Yes.
I can't imagine you don't have anything to say back to that. So let's start with the being a plague, and then I want to just get into your sort of practical details of how you live, because perhaps when people are against something, it's because they don't understand it that well.
Yeah, it reminds me early on, a lot of people would decry abuse and that allowing gay marriage is going to be harmful to children. And I think there's just so many myths associated with this. You know, if one family represents a healthy, functioning family, then as long as there's choice involved and there's not abuse, they should be able to live freely. And that's all we're asking. This idea that we're free, well, there's a lot of illegal immigrants in this country that maybe they're not enforcing the law, but they're still held hostage to the law. And that's how we feel, is that as long as there's a culture that's pushed underground, that's where the abuse fosters. abuse is fostered because no one is able to report it. No one comes forth. The whole FLDS community went where they did in the middle of the most remote area of the United States to try to live in the underground, and then people hijacked that and used that for an abusive situation. And
The
so
abuse was
that's our feelings on it. And as far as how we navigate it in love, and we navigate it because this is what we love, this is what we choose, and this is why we're here, is to be that advocate. And if the state, I wish the state would come out and make a stand and say, we're not going to arrest you. We can't uphold this law against you.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, they still hold it over our head, and they haven't arrested us. And until they do, they need to come out and say, not that we won't, but we can't.
Okay. Joe and Valley, I'm going to come back to you, but I want to just get Khadija into the conversation. Khadija, you're in Bahrain, so we're not talking about a Mormon relationship here. We're talking about a Muslim relationship here. What did you want to add?
Yes. Well, I just wanted to say to the problems that affect the Mormon community in the USA. This is just one community, one culture, one particular religious group. This is a very, very different situation to other people who, there's Muslims. If you look at cultures around the world, there are many, many polygamous cultures. And
Khadija,
these problems that are part of the Mormon community, they're not going to be the same. There isn't these problems that he mentioned. We don't have exiled. People don't exile their sons. I've never heard of that in any Arab country anywhere. I'm not saying that there aren't problems in polygamous marriages, because obviously some are happy, some there will be problems. But, these problems are not from polygamy. This is a problem from the Utah Mormon.
Okay, and
Khadija, polygamy.
One of the things I wanted to just check in with you was that the reason that you caught our eye and we asked you to be part of this program was that you actually published some rules of polygamy, how to make it actually work. Can you give us a couple of ideas about how it's actually working for you? Because you sound like you're very happy, very contented, and your husband having more than one wife, it works for your family.
Yes, that's right. I'm very happy in the marriage. All of these problems that the other guests mentioned, these are not happening. My children are going to the local school with other children. If I was living in the UK, which is where I'm from, they would go to a British state school. I wouldn't be keeping them hidden away. I wouldn't be trying to indoctrinate them with anything. Yes, I'd send them to the mosque to learn about Islam, but that's no different.
All right, so far you haven't given me any rules about how it works. How does it work for you?
Okay, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked.
Yeah.
Okay, well, the first one is that my husband is really dedicated to following the Islamic rule, which is there's two rules in Islam that are very, very important with this. There's more than that, but these are the most important ones in my opinion. First of all, the best of you is the kindest to his wives. That's something Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said. Secondly, in Islam, polygamy is only allowed if the husband can provide financially, emotionally, and every aspect that a wife needs. He has to provide for her. If he can't do that for polygamy, for more than one wife, then he is required to stick with just one.
Okay, Kristen, just leave it there for a second, because I just want to, Khadija, just leave it there for a second. So we've got that view from Bahrain. I actually just want to jump back into Kristen, because I know you're dying to come back into the conversation. Kristen?
Yes, I really appreciate what was said. I think that's one of the major issues right there, is that these many, many, many large families are originally from the Mormon doctrine, where Joseph Smith requires it to be lived in order, like I said, for salvation. And they are also required to have many, many children. And as I grew up, I was told, God will provide, God will provide. And that meant that in many cases, the majority have been on welfare, on food stamps, getting government assistance. And not that there aren't good men who want to provide for their families. They do. I know that. My family wanted to. My husband did and my father did. But what happened is that their families got so large by these requirements, these religious requirements, that they couldn't keep up. They had no other choice but to ask for government assistance. And so I think that's another issue. And what she said also, that the children are, and the wives have the same kind of love and respect. And I don't see that. And there are a few families I do. I see that in Joe's family. I see that in a few others. But I don't see a lot of that. The majority of what I've seen all my life, and the other way around, is there might be a favorite wife, there is sadness and jealousy.
Well, Jillian, our community is looping us back to a point that was raised a little bit earlier, touched upon. Aaron says, when it's legalized, polygamous marriage, it can be controlled, and violations against women will be illuminated to a greater extent than status quo. Do you think that that argument holds water?
Yeah, I think that argument makes a lot of sense. I imagine right now that children growing up in these isolated polygamous communities are taught to fear the police or suspect the government, and that children, even if they happen to be in a functional, consensual, happy polygamous family, might be afraid to go to the police to report abuses to, say, a classmate or a neighbor, just because there is this climate of fear. I really responded to everything that Tyler said about all of the abuses that are rampant in polygamous communities against women, children, and boys. But I'd like to suggest also that for a long time, heterosexual monogamous marriage was also rife with a lot of abuse against women. I mean, I think there's a strong case to be made that the institution of marriage centuries ago at its inception was kind of inherently sexist and kind of inherently abusive. And yet we've made it work.
If you could hear what our community are saying, they are raising their voices. There's lots more to talk about. And also all of our guests, we've only just got the conversation started. So you know where you have to be. You can get your laptop ready now if you're not already there. stream.aljazeera.com. This conversation will continue. But right now, here's Malika with some other stories we've been following.
After 2 years of unrest, Egyptians have elevated protests to an art form, and they finally hit a showstopper. The head of the Cairo Opera was sacked on Tuesday by the government's new Minister of Culture. When the curtain opened that night, the cast took their objections to the stage. Their signs read, "We are all Inas Abdel Dayem," and "Don't Muslim brotherize the opera." Many Egyptians called it the first protest in the opera's history and praised the singers for taking a stand. Jan writes, "I was there tonight. Pity for the performance, but understandable and courageous. Bravo." But Sarah speculates, the Cairo Opera House on strike and no shows? Maybe that is exactly what the government wants. Our next leads out of the UK, where online review culture has reached an uncomfortable new frontier. Rate Your Shag Facebook pages for many universities spread online, calling for students to review their sexual partners in a name and shame game. Facebook removed the pages almost as quickly as they appeared, though screenshots remained. But users were relieved to see the pages go. Emily tweets, "Thank God the internet has morals after all." And our last leads out of Saudi Arabia, where activists are protesting violence against women with 2 words, "Hit her," as in, if you dare. Both men and women are stepping up to the camera to demand society face the consequences of domestic abuse. They follow another campaign launched by a royal charity, which we covered in a recent show, but young Saudis are now taking the message into their own hands. What stories do you want to see next? This screen is your space, so let us know. Femi?
Malika, I do have a story that involves me and a polygamy story. Do you think I should tell it in the post show?
I think you should.
It involves being somebody's wife.
It gives a little personal anecdote. I think it's a good one.
Not the first wife, though. Are you sure I dare tell it?
I think so.
All right. stream.aljazeera.com. That is where the post show will continue with our conversation about polygamy and whether it should actually be legalized in the United States. But what about tomorrow's program? WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange will be in the stream, and we'll be talking about the upcoming Bradley Manning trial as well as the future of cyber activism. What else would you like to ask him? Send us your questions and comments to @AJStream. Stay with us, the post show is next, and of course, you will always see us online. Hello again, welcome back to the Streams Online Post Show, and we're talking about the practice of polygamy and what place it has in the US debate over marriage equality. Should it be legalized? With us, we have Gillian Keenan. She's a writer who recently wrote a piece calling for the legalization of polygamy. Tyler Meason, co-director of the documentary Sons of Perdition. Kristen Decker, author of 50 Years in Polygamy. Joe Duggar and his wife Valerie, they're in a polygamous family, and they also published a book titled Love Times 3. And Khadija, she's a co-wife in a polygamous family, and Khadija is not her real name. That's a name that she's going under. She asked us to protect her identity. Valerie Duggar, you were furrowing your brow. You had much more to say in this conversation. So I'm coming back to you. There's a couple of things that I'm just curious about, which I'm sure people must ask you an awful lot, which is how do you run a household with so many kids? How many kids do you have altogether?
Altogether, we have 23 living.
And how do you run a house? Is your house a mansion? How do you even make this work practically?
Well, our house, it fits us. It could be bigger, and some days it's really crazy. We try to be organized. The wonderful thing is that we all work together. I have 2 other people doing the same job as I do, essentially, and we have a really good system, and it's a workability system. One thing that I wanted to say is that I actually came from another plural marriage, and it ended badly, and I didn't feel like I was forced to stay there when I wasn't being provided for or taken care of, and my children weren't being cared for. I had a choice to leave, and that is exactly what I did. I chose to leave, and I realized that it wasn't polygamy that was bad or that was the problem. It was the people and the personalities maybe, and people's values and what they chose to do. But now I chose polygamy again, because that is essentially what I want to be in, the kind of family that I want to be in, that I choose to be in.
What is it like to have your man that you're in love with have 2 other women who are in love with them as well, and you all have one big family together? I don't want to get into sort of the nitty-gritty of it, but that's tough to share on that intimate level.
Yeah, it has been, and in the beginning, I will admit that there was jealousy, and I felt like somehow his loving 2 other women took something away from me. But what I've learned is that it's actually a really great experience, because he learns things in his other relationships that also bring something to my relationship with him, and it's really beautiful and wonderful. And to have them all as my best friends, it's such a good feeling. Like if I'm having a problem with one of my teenagers, we all can sit together and talk about it and work through these things, and it's just been it's been amazing.
So Joe's smiling. I can't work out whether he's exhausted or just happy to have 3 wives. Joe?
Well, I feel very blessed to have the women that I do in my life. There's times it's a lot of work. It takes a group effort for us to be able to financially support them. We're all on vacation right now as a family, and it's a big undertaking for us to do, but this is what we love. This is our joy.
Well, Femi, you just asked Valerie a question about how it feels to have 2 other women in love with your husband. Our community has a response. Salma on Twitter says, if society can accept Hugh Hefner having multiple girlfriends at one time, why should it not accept polygamy? What's the difference? And I'm going to leave that as a rhetorical one, because we have tweets here that are going back to a point that Gillian made a little earlier. Amina says, the nuclear family is a very recent construction. We need to understand that monogamy can be just as patriarchal and oppressive. And Tyler, there's a comment left here on Reddit from Ghost of Zombie, who writes in, those polygamous marriages may very well be sexist or patriarchal, but so are many 2-partner opposite sex marriages, yet one is allowed while the other one is not. And Tyler, before the show, you told our producers in the pre-interview that in polygamy, you have to be subjugated. So can you tell us how that squares away with, perhaps there's subjugation in traditional quote-unquote marriages as well?
Well, I'm not going to speak for traditional marriages by any means, but what I will say is that, look, I hear it a lot when I discuss polygamy, is someone will always come up with a funny joke, or what they assume to be a funny joke, and say, why would I want more than one wife? I can't even handle the one I have. And that's because, by and large, women, especially in today's society, are confident and secure and outgoing and strive for a little bit more. The problem that is inherent in polygamy, and I will say the vast majority, and I'm stating maybe 90%, of polygamist wives come from polygamy. They've seen it in their mother. Their grandmothers practiced polygamy. They don't know any better. They really don't know what it's like to live in a free society. And yes, in your article, you mentioned that it's part of the feminism to allow women the right to be married in a polygamous relationship, and that's fine. That is true. However, there are certain things that have to be done in order to sustain a happy polygamous relationship, and I really do believe, and having spoken to many, many, many women, they have to be kept quiet. They have to squelch their true feelings as a woman. And watch their husband be with another man, which may or may not work, but I just feel that in some ways that is so difficult. And most of these women are expected to live in a polygamous marriage.
Right.
That's how they're raised. And yes, they can leave, sure they can leave. It's very difficult to leave most of these polygamous relationships. And most of them grow up expecting to be in a polygamous relationship, and that's pretty much the way they will live, and don't know any better for the most part.
Gillian?
Tyler, I completely see what you're saying, and I'm a big fan of your film. You're a human rights activist and a hero. But I think it's very easy to dismiss or marginalize people we don't understand and assume that women are automatically inherently victims just because some of them may have made a choice that we wouldn't make ourselves. I'm often told that my sexual identity is oppressive or degrading, but I don't feel that way. It's my sexuality. I own it. I choose it, and it doesn't change the fact that I'm a feminist, an educated woman, an independent woman. I just happen to have an unusual sexual identity, let's say.
Right. You can Google that because we don't have time to go into your sexual identity right now, but you can find it online, or you can tweet me at FemiOK and I will tell you what her sexual peccadillo happens to be. You would have to bring that up, wouldn't you, Gillian?
Well, I think it's relevant to polygamy. I think these women can choose to live in a polygamous marriage but still be independent feminists.
Are you calling polygamy a sexual peccadillo then? Are you equating it with the fact...
No, I'm not calling it a sexual peccadillo, but I'm calling it an identity.
Okay, nicely put. Khadija, I have one thing I want to ask you, and it's a very specific thing. Khadija is not your real name. We had to disguise you. Why are you not proud enough to just come up and say, I'm a co-wife?
Okay, the reason is because I'm a convert to Islam. My family are not Muslim. They don't understand this, and there's a big taboo. It is purely society's taboo. I mean, I would love to just be able to tell all of my friends and family back in the UK, where I'm from, where I was raised, about this marriage and how happy I am. But everyone has got these views, and I mean, a lot of what's been said about the Mormon community, I can't identify with this at all, what the other guy was saying. I was raised in the West. I was raised with monogamy.
Right.
I chose polygamy as a free choice.
Okay.
It suits me for various reasons. I'm not bothered whether my daughters choose monogamy or polygamy. It's their free choice. They have a completely free choice. If they become monogamous, that's fine. I'm not raising them to be polygamous. I'm raising them to be how they want to be.
All right, Khadija, take a pause, take a breath there. I did tease you with my story about polygamy. So here it goes. I'm coming back from an event a few months ago. My driver is from Pakistan and we're chatting. You know how taxi drivers like to chat. He's telling me about his first wife who just came over from Pakistan. She's really young, she's got 2 toddlers, and I'm empathizing a lot. I'm telling him the story. About, she just needs to integrate. She needs to get more friends and chat. And so we get on very, very well. The very end of the journey, so we get back to my house in Brooklyn, he says, would you like to be my second wife? And so I never ever thought about polygamy until that actual moment. And the trouble is, he was so incredibly good looking that I actually considered it. And on that bombshell, we will leave this program with everybody smiling. Thank you so much to all of our guests for bringing all the various different perspectives for our community as well. If you like this show, I think you're going to love tomorrow's. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange will be in the stream. We'll be talking about the upcoming Bradley Manning trial, as well as the future of cyber activism. But what else would you like to ask him? Send us your questions and your comments to @AJStream. As always, you can find us online. Thanks for watching.